There was a lot of speculation here. Is ESPN preparing to live life without UFC?
You can't help but at least let your mind wander that way. It's unrelenting. The schedule is it really just tears you down.
That's exactly right. That's a really good point. You're cooking there, Scott.
This is something that I know you guys have some thoughts on.
You got my attention. This is part of what makes the UFC so special.
This media rights deal is one of the biggest stories of the year for the UFC. Welcome back to Against the Cage, the MMA show where we break down the latest news in MMA, recap and preview the biggest fights, which we'll be doing later on in this episode, so make sure to stick around for that. If you don't want to miss any of our MMA coverage, make sure to give us a subscribe and like this video. I'm Jake Aryeh, by the way. I am joined by my co-hosts Scott Fontana and Erich Richter. With the extra time this weekend, Memorial Day weekend, and no fights, you might have had a little extra time to watch some old fights, but noticed that a lot of the ESPN UFC library was missing. Erich, you did a great story about this. Could you fill us on what's going on with this?
Absolutely. So, I encourage everybody to go read my story on NewYorkPost.com website. Basically, what happened was that, between UFC 308, which was October of 2024, and prior, almost every event was pulled from their site. Now, there was a lot of speculation here about what possibly was going on. Is the UFC preparing, or is ESPN rather preparing to live life without UFC, take all of their catalog away from us? And just to throw some cold water on that, that is not the case here. And in my reporting of this, I learned a lot, talked to a lot of people, and basically what we're looking at here is ESPN's preparing their go-to-market system, and there was a transfer over, and there's some glitches, I guess you could say, in the technology where some of the content wasn't transferring over to their new go-to-market back-end system, technical high-level stuff. In my conversations, I'd say I learned a lot. The conversations are ongoing between the UFC and ESPN, and I would say that at this point, a deal between the two companies is, very, very possible. I'd say, I'd even pinpoint ESPN as a favorite here as we get down to it. I wrote in the article in May of 2018, the UFC announced that they were moving from Fox to ESPN. The clock's about to turn to June. And while the UFC says that they're in no rush, any company that they would end up going to will be in a rush to get any sort of back end programming involved here. Like it would take a while for them to get this set up. So at this point, ESPN is a favorite, and I feel like a deal could definitely come together here within the next several weeks, months, definitely before the end of the summer. The longer that this goes, the less likely it is that a Netflix, Amazon, TNT gets involved, because it just takes so much time. And if they have less than 6 months to do it, that's where we're at. So I would say get ready for more cable TV fights, guys. I don't know how you guys feel about cable TV these days, but that's where I feel like it's heading.
Well, not to cast any aspersions on your reporting. I'm sure it's sound, but if I am, let's say, a casual observer of this news, and I'm going in and I'm like, hey, I want to go watch, UFC 284 for whatever reason on ESPN, and I find it's not there, and I find out, oh yeah, the whole library's been down except for, some of the more recent events. You can't help but at least let your mind wander that way. So it's fair for the average fan to start wondering that. Having said that, you make a lot of sense. I mean, especially the fact that the longer it goes, the more likely it is for ESPN to kind of emerge as the very solid favorite. That makes a lot of sense to me, just from being a limited but knowledgeable reporter on the subject, right?
Yeah, I would just say from like a practical standpoint, I mean, how hard is it to build out an entire, entire set for UFC and like get all the pieces together? Just practically, it's difficult to do. So only having 6 months to do that, starting in June, you're only gonna have 6 months to do that. That's not really practical for anyone that would be coming on here. I would suspect my best guess at this point that ESPN will definitely be staying on it. And one thing that I talked about was that their social media platforms are so vast. Like the ESPN MMA Instagram account is a massive value to the UFC. And, and we've always talked about the UFC's interest level in social media. Sometimes they'll even boast social media numbers over actual like physical numbers that make sense. Like a power slap, they were like top five sport in social media or whatever on YouTube or whatever. And yeah, I hear you with the laughing, but they obviously care a lot about social media. ESPN has a really big social media presence. And I think they would be foolish at this point to leave that. And look, I understand that Bloomberg picked them as at a $1 billion per year value for their TV rights. I'm not so sure that they're going to get there, and I think that that's where it gets a little tricky, is because if they don't get there, then the shareholders will view that as a failure. But however, I think that ESPN will probably come up a little bit off of the 500 that they're currently paying, and maybe Netflix comes in for some other programming that we can talk about that they have, other content. But the way that I view this is that ESPN and the UFC will come together on a deal within the next several weeks.
Well,
I
so
will say just real quick, Jake. I will say, kind of on the subject of, hey, it's going to take a while for anyone to build out, programming around the UFC, whether they get the deal or not, that kind of thing. It also lends a little credence to the idea that, hey, maybe there really is some technical issues here moving this library from A to B, because ESPN, yes, it's not going to be ESPN Plus anymore. It's going to be just ESPN proper and in many different forms, right? So you can understand how this could be a bit of a challenge. We're talking about 5, 6 months out from the launch of that. So it makes sense.
yeah, so I love these conversations. I mean, this media rights deal is one of the biggest stories of the year for the UFC. And, well, there's so much to talk about who they're going to go with, how much they're going to spend, and all of those other fun logistics. I thought it would be a fun opportunity for us to talk about what it would be like from a fan's perspective, what you guys would like to see. Not necessarily, which program they go with, fights, per year, all that good stuff, what the UFC product looks like starting in 2026. And you guys, Scott especially, have been watching this a little bit longer than I have. You've seen how things can be different from this ESPN era that we're in. So I'd like to ask you guys a few questions about what would you like, and I'll give some of my thoughts as well. So regardless of what any of those other logistics are from a fan perspective, would you guys like to see more or fewer events per year than we currently have now starting in 2026? Scott, I'll start with you.
I've been a big proponent of the number coming off of that, like 40, 41, 42, 43, 44 that we have seen in recent years. It's unrelenting. The schedule is it really just tears you down, I feel like, and it can suck away a lot of the anticipation that you have for a fight weekend. So I would love to see them go back to maybe that like low 30s number per year that we saw in the early years of the Fox deal. So we're talking about, 12, 13 years ago. I thought that was a really nice spot. They had 12s, I believe occasionally 13 pay-per-views a year, plus a bunch of fight nights to fill in. And I thought that was a really nice number. I would love to see that. I don't know. What do you like, Jake? Because you're newer to this, but you're probably a little more. I bet you're watching with your friends. You're having kind of that fan time a little bit. What do you want? What do your friends want?
Yes, so great question. And one thing that we talked about, I believe it was Eric that brought this up, the UFC's main competition is getting people to stay in on a Saturday night. Luckily, I'm very lucky that most of my friends, my close circle, are big UFC fans. Maybe not as much as myself, but I think that it's a heck of a lot easier asking my friends to stay in and watch a great fight night, say like Carlos Praches versus Ian Gary, which I did watch with them, versus maybe what we're coming up on this weekend. I don't see many enthusiastic thumbs ups in the chat when I say, do you guys want to stay in on Saturday night and watch this? So I think I'm all in for going with fewer events, just simply because it'll give me and the people that I watch with much more of an incentive to watch these fights.
So how does the kind of suggestion I put out there sound, where you got like maybe 12 pay-per-views a year plus an extra, 20-ish fight nights to kind of, maybe every other week, sort of, there's something, but maybe not every week.
I think that sounds great to me. I think the number of pay-per-views that they currently have is honestly pretty perfect. I think they've had it down for a while. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, they're
It's
at 14 pay-per-views right now. Just keep that
right,
in mind. So
right.
I'm thinking, for me personally, I'd rather have it closer to 12,
One a
maybe
month.
13. Yeah, I like one a month.
I like the
Yeah. So
14, but
just
similar thoughts.
one thing I'll piggyback on the amount of events is that UFC was in the 40 range, the low 40 range this past year, and
Like the whole
baseball.
ESPN run, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. So, and not to compare baseball and MMA, they're two different things. But I will say that ESPN opted out of their deal with baseball at when they were getting 30 games per season and the home run derby. They opted out and they're paying $550 million per season for the rights to broadcast those games. I think that's very interesting. The UFC is offering 40 plus events, and obviously the pay-per-view is its own separate cost. So really, the UFC they're paying that amount, and then the ESPN is also keeping the pay-per-view amount. But I think that is noteworthy. I would venture to guess that assuming it stays with ESPN, that it's not going to change the amount of events. But I agree with the 14 pay-per-views per year. I wrote in my article that it was I believe it was $1,220 is how much it cost to be a UFC fan last year if you include Fight Pass, ESPN Plus, and all 14 pay-per-views. That's on
A
par.
hardcore fan, that is.
A hardcore fan, the hardest of hardcore fans. There's over 500 fights a year, right? So there's over 500 fights last year. So that's a lot. But I will say that's more expensive than it is to watch the NFL. And the NFL, there's 365 games for regular season. That's a lot of content that people are paying a lot of money for. If they were to go to a Netflix, that's an additional $17.99 a month. Did the math? $216 a year added on to the cost of a kind of tapped out fan base. I feel like people are kind of upset about how expensive it is to be a fan, honestly.
That's a nice pun, by the way. I appreciate that.
There you go.
But what I want to say though too is the you bring up the baseball comparison. I think that is certainly appropriate enough in this case because even though it's kind of apples and oranges, they're both still coming from the same proprietor in ESPN. ESPN is broadcasting 30 prime baseball games in a prime time slot, and these are generally like game of the day or week kind of thing, right? They're high level games. When we take out the pay-per-views from the UFC, we're taking about 14 events out. We've got like high 20s, 28, 29 events a year, and those are not generally the highest caliber stuff. This is sort of the leftovers that we're talking about. The things that maybe they save things that they think could be somewhat attractive for a fight night as well. They've got enough great fighters that they can handle a certain amount of it. But yeah, there's a lot of, especially we saw for a while, a lot of these Apex shows were just a bunch of Dana White Contender Series guys and gals that are basically still prospects. And that's not, I don't think, what ESPN wants out of their 30 or so non-pay-per-views, right?
That's exactly right. That's a really good point. You're cooking there, Scott. So, like think about it last week, right? Yankees, Mets, Subway Series, Sunday Night Baseball. That definitely drew a huge number. Didn't stop ESPN from opting out of that deal, right? Didn't stop them. But like Aaron Blanchfield versus Macy Barber as a headliner with, a curtain jerker of an 0-3 fighter and an 0-2 fighter with a 9-7 record and a 14-8 record. That's not exactly what you're looking for. I'm sure ESPN. No, I mean, look, the curtain jerker of this card, would it main card for an LFA card? I mean, yeah, probably main card, but main event at this point, probably not. If you're five losses consecutively for the two fighters, so yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that I did want to look at, and it's very valuable for me talking to you two guys because you guys have seen different schedules, is Saturday night is it's always Saturday night for the UFC. Would you like to see them do different days? I'll start again with you, Scott. What are your thoughts on that?
I've been a huge proponent of alternate days, taking a little bit of the load off a Saturday. I mean, every Saturday has to be blocked out for this, except for, save for a few, right? We're coming off of one. But I like the idea of like a midweek show here and there. It doesn't have to be all the time, but like maybe 3, 4, 5 times a year, you put out a, one of those like in the midst of not a big fight coming up shortly thereafter, but maybe in like kind of that little break area, you put one on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night. I think there's something to that. Then you get these people who actually can have a little bit of a social life. They can still get their fights on a weeknight. And then when you get around to those bigger cards, those pay-per-views, the numbered events, whatever you want to call them, then they're a lot more hyped up to block out their Saturday. Maybe they can get away with it a little bit more with their significant other, with their family, what have you. And it just creates a fan who can live a more natural life while also being passionate about the product that they're putting out there.
Yeah. Eric, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm blanking on exactly which card it was, but I believe Hamzat Chimaev fought that week. I don't believe he fought on a Wednesday, but it was a Wednesday card. There were Saturday fights, Wednesday fights, Saturday fights. I want to even say that there were two pay-per-views stuffed in there. I think that it was a pay-per-view Saturday, Wednesday fight card, pay-per-view the next Saturday.
They
I'm
had,
pretty
you're talking about like 3 or 4 years ago, they had three fights
Yes.
in like an 8 day span out in
Yes.
they were calling it Fight Island at that point still.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a Wednesday, it was like a Wednesday morning card. It was
Yes.
very strange. But I was like Wednesday morning doesn't really work, unfortunately, with an audience that actually has to go to work. I think it has to be evenings. But
Back
yeah, I
then, that
mean
wasn't a
Wednesday is
thing.
great. That's yeah, I mean we lived in a different world for a little while, right? Not to steal your thunder, Eric, but yeah, you were on the right track. Absolutely. That was like
I
the last
love
one that happened.
I love that. Why don't you just stuff it like once a year? Stuff the calendar with fights where fights kind of give us, especially when like maybe not, maybe not like during the fall, right? During football season, but maybe like during June or July when basketball's over, hockey's over. There's a absent word. Sports fans are kind of clamoring for something to watch, something fun. I think that that's the time to do it. That would be my big ask of the UFC. And Scott, I'm actually like surprised. I feel like we're probably on the reverse side of most people who want Saturdays. I feel like most people would want Saturdays. I totally agree with you. There needs to be, not even just want, there needs to be more weekday cards. Tuesday Night Contender Series, you got my attention almost every week.
Yeah. No, I mean, I coming from someone like myself who might not be as knee deep as you guys are watching the events. I've caught Dana White Contender Series events just because it's so easy to throw on a Tuesday night, and the timing of it works out well. And maybe a conversation for another time, but these cards end so late on Saturday nights. If they did do weekday events, I would imagine they probably yeah,
Shorter
shorter
cards for
cards
those
make them
weekday events.
earlier.
Make them, maybe it's just a main card. It's just a 6 fight card. I don't think that'd be such a problem because then you're blocking off 3 hours of time. That's like essentially a game's length of time on a weeknight. I think people would be down for that.
I definitely
Not
agree.
Not for nothing, but UFC doesn't even really broadcast the early prelims at all. Like, why not? Why have them at all? If ESPN's not going to broadcast them for real, you could probably just put a regular card onto ESPN and that's it. I don't understand why even have the early prelims if they're going to be on mostly just Fight Pass and Plus.
At the very least now, I mean, we're going to go into a new reality in the fall once they do go transition over to this new ESPN, all-encompassing app with the different tiered subscriptions and that kind of thing. So I think that's going to at least evolve that portion of it. It may not look the same even then, but who knows? Like, there's a lot of variables at play.
Yeah. So my next question for you guys, and we kind of did just touch on this, was the bouts per event. So we were talking about that more specifically on weekday events, but as a whole, do you think that there should be less bouts maybe to make the quality of the cards better? And how do you feel about the pacing? Because that would affect it as well.
I think the pacing of ESPN programming is quite good. It really is almost beyond reproach. I can't really complain, especially when we've seen some pretty brutal pacing. Unfortunately, PFL events they've gotten a little bit better, but it's still a work in progress there.
Yep.
Bellator has had issues previously when they were still in operation. They had issues at times with pacing, but then they sort of figured it out when they were able to get their prelims on YouTube. And those were breakneck. Those were always fun. I loved the YouTube Bellator prelims. That was fantastic. But as far as UFC goes, I think they've got the pacing. The number of bouts, I would be okay with that dropping down. But I am also asking in my world, in the perfect world that I'm building, my utopia, that there are fewer events. So that would mean fewer fighters on the roster too.
Yeah.
If we're going to cut down the number of bouts, then we're going to cut down the number of fighters on the roster. Is that something they want to do? I don't know, but I feel like if they have a more trim roster with more elite talent, that frankly most of these people still want to fight for them anyway. They're going to be able to sign a lot of the people that they want regardless. I'm okay with that to a certain degree, especially if it means that maybe some of those fighters could even reap just a little bit more of the revenue. Although, would that really happen? Who knows?
It's wishful thinking. Eric, what do
All
you
that.
got?
Yeah, I mean, cards are like 7 hours long. Like a lot of them. That's just too long. I mean, that's just way too long. Like that 7 hour long cards, like, I mean, those cards will start at 6 and end at 2. And that's not an exaggeration. That's an 8 hour card. Like, I don't know many fan bases who have any sort of attention span. Like, I could barely watch football that long. And I don't think like that's longer than the 1 o'clock window to the 8 o'clock window. Like, that's a long time. That's a lot of sports. So that's one thing. The cards are too long. Totally agree with that. The second thing that you said, Scott, is the pacing. The UFC's pacing and their production quality is almost unmatched in all of combat, boxing included. Boxing's pacing is not
Very
at the
good.
level. Yeah, I don't know exactly what they figured something out logistically, and this is part of what makes the UFC so special. Their secret sauce isn't just it's their ability to build fights, build fighters usually, and also their ability to get the fighters out there immediately. And like they're not working on a set schedule. If there's like 5 first round knockouts, get out there. We're going for the sixth fight. And the same thing with decisions. Now, when it comes to decisions, usually there won't be a post-fight interview if there's a lot of decisions, if they're running behind. That's how it goes. The UFC's pacing is incredible, and I wouldn't change a thing. Keep doing what they're doing, and however else they did it, I can't believe that no one else has copycatted it, but shout out to them.
Well, I'll tell you what they figured out. They figured out don't give all these fans like extra stuff that they don't care about. We don't need concert performances. We don't need any of this fluff. We don't need several interviews with one, fighter that they're trying to promote a little bit, or maybe someone who's got a side project or something like that that's on there, or even a celebrity. Most fighters, most fight fans, I should say, don't want that. They just want to watch the fights, especially if they're watching for those 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And they figured that out, and no one else either seems to have figured it out or cares to. And I think boxing, especially, you're right. They are the worst of this. They are the absolute worst of it. And honestly, it's not really gotten any better now that we've seen, Saudi Arabia get involved too. They love to have concerts and all this stuff. It's just kind of extra.
We'll see what happens with TKO boxing. If they're trying to quote unquote match the UFC model, that's going to be something that is going to be very interesting to look at from that perspective.
If TKO boxing exists, I should add. We're not sure yet.
Yeah, well,
It exists in the same way a tree falling in woods with no one around exists. Like, do we know it makes a sound? I'm not around to see it, but at least it's in theory there.
yeah. Well, all we can do is wait at this point, but that's another interesting storyline for this year for sure.
For another time.
Yeah, and as far as the pacing goes, I wholeheartedly agree. I don't know if there's anyone that would disagree about how the pacing currently works. Like it's fast enough moving along to where it will keep you locked in. Like there really aren't any moments and in between fights from a viewer at home, they're playing stuff to educate you on what fight you're seeing next, get a little bit into a glimpse of the fighters and all that stuff while they get stuff set up. And if you have enough time, for me, it's like I have enough time to go run down and grab a snack or something like that from the bodega, and the fight's just starting when I get back up. So I think it's perfect.
Hey, I want to add real quick because I don't think I clarified the number of bouts that I would think would be ideal depending on the number of events you're holding. I like 12. I think 12 is like a fine number. Once we start getting to that 13 and 14 level, especially when some of those fights are, let's say, kind of on that, LFA main card level that you're talking about, Eric, that's where it's like, okay, maybe we didn't need that many. I think 10 for like, let's say a weaker fight night, and then 12 for like a nice pay-per-view, I think is a perfectly good build-up. You got 5 fights on the main card, you got 4 on the main prelims there, so we're at 8. And then you got 4 more early prelims too that can get in some decent fights as well. I like that number for those types of events.
12 is good. 15, which is I guess technically like a full card these days, like no one's injured.
That's a rare one, but
Yeah.
it will happen
Yeah.
occasionally. Yeah.
That's like,
This,
maxed out. That's too much.
this weekend's card is 11. And not
Cool
a
with
lot
that.
of I'm cool with 11. I honestly I like 6. I like the 6 idea. Give me a 2-hour card.
I don't hate that. Yeah.
And then the quality is just up the wazoo. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
it's two ends of the
Less is
scale.
more.
Yeah, less is more sometimes. And then this is something that I know you guys have some thoughts on. Scott, I'll start with you. You were mentioning the Dana White Contender Series, playing a role into maybe some of the weaker bouts, especially in like the openings of cards and on the early prelims. What are your thoughts on shows like Dana White's Contender Series, The Ultimate Fighter, of course, being one, Road to the UFC? How does this play into the product of the UFC that you might want changed just to stay the same?
So I'm gonna say this to you guys, like there is a level of keep up that I can handle right now based on, need to cover versus interesting covering. And Dana White Contender Series, Road to UFC, and The Ultimate Fighter do not make my cut. I tend not to watch them. If someone says, "Hey, there was a fight on DWCS, you gotta go watch," I'll go back and watch it. That's okay, but I'm not really missing much. This is a prospect who's potentially earning their way onto the roster. I could easily watch, Cage Fury or LFA or, one of the many regional promotions that puts on pretty terrific fights of roughly the same level and, honestly, a little bit better production value in some cases as well because Dana White Contender Series is taking place in a warehouse. It doesn't really have as much pageantry as even when they fight in Atlantic City for a CFFC. So, I don't really engage with that one as much. But I will say this: what I would like to see, I think they all have their purpose. I don't want them to go away. I think Road in particular is quite useful for a particular market where they're trying to especially find talent in Asia and that kind of thing, and market to people on the other side of the world. There's still value in that. But one thing I would love to see them do with Dana White Contender Series is take some of those people who have earned their contract and those guys, those gals, they end up being the headliners for maybe a more like 7 fight card, and maybe have just a fewer of the prospect fights that are trying to earn their way on. Like maybe 3 or 4 of them are trying to earn like 1 or 2 contracts or something like that, whatever Dana feels like that night. And that's a little bit more of almost a Strike Force Challenger Series callback here, like a UFC Challenger Series. I don't think they want to do that, but they kind of have that with DWCS. Just enhance that a little bit with the talent that really ought not to be on UFC proper yet, but they're prospects they've identified and want to give them a platform. I like that. I don't know what you guys think. What do you think, Eric?
So the way that I view this, I hear what you're saying about interest level being in these 3 different products that the UFC produces. Road to the UFC, I literally never watched a single episode.
It's not really marketed to you.
It's really
Yeah.
not. And I'm pretty sure it was on at like 2 o'clock in the morning one time, and I was like, I don't even know what this is. I'm turning it off. Dana White Contender Series, I watch pretty regularly. Actually, I really like Dana White's Contender Series. I also really like betting on Dana White's Contender Series. I think that the product's actually really solid, and I've made a good amount of money on Dana White Contender Series. So, and I'm bored on Tuesday sometimes, sue me. I do watch a good amount of Dana White Contender Series. A lot of the tape study that I do really helps as these fighters get bigger and bigger. So that's something that's helpful. The Ultimate Fighter, I have a couple issues with the Ultimate Fighter. My number one issue with the Ultimate Fighter is that it's all pre-taped and that none of these fights actually count towards their record. They're all considered exhibitions because they're only 2 rounds. There's no sanctioning body. I have an issue with that. I don't know how you do it, but I prefer all the fights to be live, so I'm just not interested in it. Now, in terms of where they fit into the UFC going forward, I would say that the Ultimate Fighter and Road to the UFC should all go to Netflix. If Netflix jumps in, I'd say they all should go to Netflix. That's perfect UFC and Netflix content. If you look at the Drive to Survive with F1, that's like the same kind of idea. Like you could totally mimic that and have Netflix jump in, give their expertise in terms of production, and move that over there. So I think that Road
But
to the UFC.
UFC has such a tight grip on production. That's kind of one of those big issues, though, Eric.
Right. So that's what they'd have to negotiate, right? They have to see if they're a willing marriage partner. That's what one of the main issues is that the UFC controls everything in terms of production, and Netflix has so much expertise in the space, more than the UFC does. So they'd have to be willing to let somebody else get their glimpse on it and attempt to make it better. And or in UFC's case, maybe risk it getting worse. From their perspective. So, for me, I think The Ultimate Fighter needs a revamp. Obviously, I think they tried it with Chael and DC. Great interview. You guys should go watch it. Scott Fontana had with them. But I think The Ultimate Fighter, I'm not going to watch it. And, I think that it's better fit for Netflix.
I think that those are good shouts. I mean, in theory, right? Scott, you said there might be some logistical issues, but the idea itself, I definitely like that. Um, as far as the Dana White, I would tend to agree with Scott in terms of just like me. If I didn't watch that episode of Dana White Contender Series, and there's just this like guy that has a pretty small record coming in to open up a card, it takes a lot of the interest out of it for me. And like obviously they'll show the clips like I was talking about, like in between fights and previewing the fighters and stuff like that, but I don't know. It doesn't really do it for me. But
And it also, to add to that, Jake, I think it also devalues the idea of being a UFC fighter. I mean, there it used to be a proving ground where the
yeah,
best of the best went, and there is still that, as long as they play ball contractually and that kind of thing. But also, there's this gigantic element of the roster. Dana White Contender Series alum, and Dana likes to put it on the board,
yep,
right? When he's
in
showing
the
the
war
bout
room.
orders and that kind of thing. Yeah, in the war room, exactly. And it's that's a weird flex, I think, to me, because all you're doing now is saying, well, now we have to let's go back to baseball here. Imagine if you're mixing all of your best players and then you're also having them play alongside of the prospects who are actually not ready for the majors, but they're there anyway because hey, we just need to get them some fights.
I'm curious in the past 5 years, what percentage of the roster that they signed was from Dana White Contender Series and Tough, and I'd reckon it'd be
There's a stat out there. I
yeah.
forget what it is, but there is a
I'll
stat
put it
out
on
there.
the screen in
There
in
are
the
some people
editing.
who've done the data crunching of that. I don't have that data, but
Yeah, I wish we could
there's a pretty
react to
good
it
source of
live,
that
but
information.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would reckon it'd be a huge number. So yeah, tells you a lot. Okay, but one thing that I did want to have you guys do is let us know in the comments what you think you would like for the next deal starting in 2026. Do you want fewer events? Do you want fewer fights? Do you want more events and more fights? And you're just a consumer who can't get enough of it? Let us know in the comments and let us know what you think. Something that I also thought that we should talk about that occurred since the last time that we spoke. Kevin Lee is now going to be in the PFL semifinals. This occurred because, as we talked about previously, JJ Wilson had to pull out because of a jaw injury. Pretty serious stuff. Scott, I'm sure you know you can resonate with that.
I feel
And
it.
obviously, this comes with a little bit of backlash because Kevin Lee was not in the alternates, which the PFL will release the list of alternates. Should such a thing happen, they announced a press release that Kevin Lee is jumping in against Gadzi Rabadanov. So Scott, just your thoughts on this whole thing. What do you think about the way that this PFL is handling its new tournament structure in this manner?
I have a little bit of a bone to I have a bone to pick with PFL on this one. I don't really love look. There is nothing against Kevin Lee, who I think is actually an upgrade to their tournament in and of himself. Right? He's a fighter who belongs in their 155-pound field. Why wasn't he there to begin with? That's what I don't understand. He wasn't there as an alternate. He wasn't there in another one of their bouts. They didn't sign him when they lost Alexander Shabliy 6 days before. They could have tried to get him in at that point instead of losing Shabliy, losing, the likes of Tony Caruso and Robert Watley and Sergio Casio. These are all fighters that they had as part of their alternate bout system that they had in place. All fights fell out. They didn't end up with any alternate bouts at lightweight or really any of the weights, actually. They had everything kind of fall apart here. The alternates, without that, you're kind of left with scrambling, and that's why you end up with Kevin Lee coming in at the semifinals and not even having to have proved himself in the quarterfinals. And I think that's the issue here is we're robbing the tournament of its tournament structure. You're supposed to be in an 8-man, 8-woman field and try to be the one who emerges from the best. Well, now he gets to come in having skipped the line a little bit.
He's
Frankly,
fresher, yeah.
I would rather have seen them take someone who lost in the first round and put them in if they were available rather than put Kevin Lee in. Get Kevin Lee on your roster. You should have got him in to begin with, but get him on your roster. But just to skip the line, he is eligible to win their PFL championship. The PFL had announced in their press release. I don't love the way this was done. I think this was handled poorly. And I think it does start to devalue their tournament structure if this is the way we're going to do things.
Eric, how about you? Do you have any thoughts?
They're making it up as they go along. That's it. They're just making it up. They're just like whatever. I'm sure that they negotiated with Kevin Lee. Probably couldn't come to a deal, and then once Kevin Lee had a little bit more leverage, they gave him what he wanted. That'd be my guess.
Who knows?
I issues wise, whatever. I mean, Kevin Lee should have been on their roster, like you said. He'll probably end up losing this fight anyway. So I'm not real. I would be very interested to see where he even is in his career. He didn't look good when he was at was it Eagle FC when Khabib had his promotion for
I
about
believe so.
6 months.
He did even sign with the UFC briefly after that.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, he didn't look great at the end of his UFC run. Didn't look good in Eagle FC. I want to say he fought Diego Sanchez and looked terrible, and Diego Sanchez was on his way out. So, yeah, for me, not too interested in Kevin Lee being in this tournament. Yeah, I'm just more so I'm bummed out that JJ Wilson isn't fighting. I don't know who broke his jaw, but whoever broke his jaw, you suck, man. Like that's just bad. You're a bad training partner. Honestly, you're a bad training partner if you broke your fighter has a fight coming up and he's 2 wins away from $500,000, which is life-changing money for him. And you just broke his jaw and took that away from him. Like that training partner, I hope you're feeling that because that's tough. And I'm sure the coaches are pissed at you, and they should be.
Well,
Was it a
JJ,
training injury? I actually don't know I don't remember the details off the top of my head, but I mean, if that was the case, then yeah, I mean, that stinks.
He fought a while ago, so I'm assuming that I mean, we would have known if he had broken his jaw. He fought, what was it, 2 months ago?
About a month and a half, little month, over a month, yeah.
yeah.
I would assume that we'd know by now, but I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it wasn't a training partner, and maybe it was a fight. But I'm guessing at this point that it was training partner.
One thing to note is that this past weekend we were supposed to have GFL 1, which Kevin Lee was signed with. So that is an important thing to note as far as contracts and
That's true.
signings go. Maybe that had something to do with this whole shakeup. And now the GFL has pretty much fallen apart. That, he's an
Before it
open
even got
guy.
started.
Yeah. Anyways, that's a whole other conversation. But one thing that I do want to ask you, as far as you did say that this maybe devalues their new tournament structure, Scott. What do you think that they could be doing better going forward with something like this?
I mean, one of the biggest issues they had is that they lost all these alternates because, unfortunately, some of them stepped into fights and some of them dropped out themselves for one reason or another. But realistically, it all came down to injury, a mix of several things: injuries, failed drug test in one case at the very least. We had visa issues, and we had an unknown reason yet to be revealed for Alexander Shabliy, as far as I'm aware. This is a mix of things that are unfortunately unpredictable in terms of injuries and drug tests. You just don't know who is going to get hurt or who might fail from one reason or another. Sometimes you can guess, but maybe not always. But when it comes to visa issues, and this has been something that has plagued the PFL for years, especially when they're bringing in fighters from, let's say, Eastern Europe and that kind of thing, we can predict this. We know if someone's having a visa issue. We can get more rostered fighters who are going to at least be able to fight in the country that they're going to compete in. That much can be done. And if you're going to have that many fighters from, say, the Eastern Bloc that are potential visa issues, get that many more alternates on there. Get a few, like, I like that they're doing these kind of more trim cards, 8 to 10 fights. It's really just been 8 because they lost the alternate bouts. But I like the idea of that. Just make sure we continue to have alternates. If you lose something, gosh, just put something together. I mean, you must have some fighters on the roster you can use. And I think that's the problem. Just better preparation. better depth of roster and availability. I think is the only thing you can do. Otherwise, you start to have these things come apart.
Fair enough. And then the other thing that obviously now that we have this new fight, Rabadonov versus Kevin Lee. Well, actually, one thing that I do want to preface that I did have a thought on is I feel like the elephant in the room is that they probably did this not because that they ran out of alternates, but that Kevin Lee is a former UFC fighter and he's got maybe a bigger name. Like I recognize Kevin Lee more than I do Godzi Rabadonov, you know? So that's just something
Sure.
that I had in my head. But in terms of fairness or any of, that other stuff, obviously I agree with what you're saying. It's kind of a sticky situation just throwing someone in who is now going in fresh or less damage, you know? So that's definitely something to consider. But now that we do have Rabadonna versus Kevin Lee, Scott, what do you think about this matchup?
I'm more interested in it than Eric is. Eric is very ambivalent, he already said. But as far as me, I think it is at least a UFC, PFL caliber belonging opponent who has accomplished things. Is he on the back nine of his career? Absolutely. But I think if you're bringing somebody in, if you've already gotten to this point where you're just bringing in another body who has not been able to be a part of it from the beginning, I think Kevin Lee was a pretty good signing, and I think it's a real fascinating matchup for Rabadonov here. I mean, we've got another a wrestle heavy guy in Kevin Lee. He likes to get the fight to the ground. He likes to, work from down there. Can he do that against somebody as sturdy kind of all around, especially on the ground as Rabadonov? I don't know. I think it's an interesting test. So I don't hate the fight. And I certainly they brought him in because of name recognition. That is exactly why, Jake. You hit the nail on the head there. I just wish they'd done it sooner. That's what it comes down to.
Eric, how about you? What are you feeling about this fight and the signing of Kevin Lee?
Rabadonov was a minus 600 favorite against Mark Diakese. And that's a former UFC caliber opponent. I would just, there's no odds out currently, but I would venture to guess that Rabadonov will be a minus 500 favorite at the minimum, and he'll probably win easily.
There we go. So some other news items of the week that we do have to get to, and we will be going to the Fight Night preview right after this. We'll get Eric's 3 bets in 3 minutes and all that. But getting through some of the other agenda items of the week, Scott, would you like to take us through quick hits?
Yeah, and unfortunately, the first one we've got to lead with is not pleasant news for anybody involved. UFC Hall of Famer BJ Penn has been arrested twice in Hawaii in the last week for abuse of a family member or household member, and his mother has filed a restraining order against him. Do the math on that one. It is the latest in a disturbing series of events around Penn and his family, going back to April, where he was saying that he seemed to believe his mother and many of his brothers were actually imposters and have been murdered. This is it's wild. It's unfortunate. It's very tragic. Um, all you can do is just hope for the best for all involved, that everyone gets their health and safety taken care of. Moving on to something a little lighter, but probably also made up here in some ways. Michael Chandler, in a pair of threads on posts, he said that first, Connor with 3 exclamation points, and then the date, January 24th, 2026, which is a Saturday. He seems to be saying that he's either fighting Conor McGregor that day, calling him out to fight that day, or maybe he's just saying stuff. Either way, I'll believe it when it's happening in the cage.
Same.
We'll file that under, dig with a grain of salt. There are a couple of fight announcements here I want to get to as well. Kaya Sakura, who lost his UFC flyweight bid in his promotional debut back in December, he will now face former title challenger Tim Elliott at UFC 319 on August 16th in Chicago. And then there were a bunch of bouts added to the Fight Night card in Nashville on January 12th. There was one I wanted to highlight, and that is Lauren Murphy against Eduardo Mora. This is interesting to me because I had a conversation with Lauren Murphy last year for a story, and seemed to indicate that maybe her next fight would be the last of her career. This is the first time she's been scheduled since then. Nothing official, but maybe this is the swan song of former title challenger Lauren Murphy.
There we go. So that's quick hits for you. Thank you, Scott. And This weekend, of course, as we mentioned before, we do have a UFC Fight Night getting back on schedule after that off weekend. Erin Blanchfield will be taking on Macy Barber at flyweight. First off, Eric, I'll start with you because, again, I say this a bunch. I love hearing the way you break down fights. What do you think about this one and the implications around it?
It's an interesting fight. At this weight class, I mean, obviously Blanchfield, who's, Jersey born and raised, she's, got the grappling advantage. Macy Barber, a long time, highly thought of prospect, for the division. And, I'm not super excited to watch it as a main event, to be honest. I think that there is a world where this goes a dragging 5-round fight. But I'm hoping for Blanchfield to get back in the win column here. I mean, she's coming off of a loss where she probably would have gotten a title fight if she had pulled off the win. So, Manon Fiore ended up fighting for the title, lost to Valentina Shevchenko. So big spot for Erin Blanchfield here. Hopefully she can get the win. I'm rooting for her, but I'm not super enthralled with this as a 5-round fight. I feel like it could end up being a 5-round slog.
Anything to say to that, Scott?
Disagree in the sense that I'm at least looking forward to this. I think this is totally a worthy 5-round main event fight. Could it absolutely go down that avenue that you're talking about, Eric, where maybe it's not the most aesthetically pleasing? Absolutely, I could see that happening. But these two women do tend to bring it. Erin Blanchfield is kind of a violent fighter. She loves to go for brutal submissions. She is very willing to slug it out, even when maybe it's not always the smartest play. So I think there's going to be, I think there's more upside here than maybe you're giving credit for, my opinion. But we'll say this is definitely one of the better Apex main events that we're getting, because at least there's impact here. We're talking about something that either one could earn a title shot here. Macy Barber has won 6 strikes in a row here, coming off of the win. It's been 14 months since she beat Caitlin Sermonara, the former Caitlin Chukagian, former title challenger herself. But Erin Blanchfield, she brings in here the experience in those 5-round fights. She's gone full 25 the last 2 out, including a rally for victory over Rose Namajunas the last time in November. I think there's some fascinating dynamics at play, and I think it's going to be a better fight than you think, Eric. So we'll see who's right or wrong, but I believe in this one. I do.
Hope you're right.
I mean, maybe I'm a little too negative sometimes. I think I've said that in the past. I might be a little too negative and then proven wrong. Like Bilal Muhammad, Jack Dell, I was super down on that fight, but it ended up being a absolute war, one of the best welterweight fights of all time. So, I mean, what do I know? For my fight to watch for the weekend, I'm going Bruno Lopez versus Dustin Jacoby. Love this fight. This is a good stand-up fight. Bruno Lopez, you might not know him. He's a plus 195 underdog, 14-1. He's 1-0 in the UFC. He also won on Dana White's Contender Series. I watched that fight. He was very fun to watch then. And I'm expecting, fireworks. I mean, I like Jacoby, at light heavyweight here, but I think that Bruno Lopez has definitely got some tricks up his sleeve in terms of the striking. And, maybe he'll mix in some grappling a little bit too. He's not a fish on the ground by any means. So excited for this fight. And, I mean, the card's not perfect, but there are some more than worthwhile fights.
Love it. Alrighty, so now that we have the main event, sorry, Scott, I gotta go to you.
I got one too.
Sorry,
I want to throw this one out here because we can't ignore this fight. This is Mateusz Gamrot going against Ludwig Klein. It is not necessarily the opponent that you would ideally want for someone in the top 10 like Gamrot.
Yeah.
But Ludwig Klein, I mean, at least he stepped to the plate. Gamrot has kind of spoken about maybe he's been having trouble getting those higher level fighters to sign the dotted line against him. But I'm gonna look forward to this one because hey, if Klein wins, this is a big thing for him. He takes a big leap up into that upper level of the division. Gamrot, it's more like holding serve, but he's an interesting guy. I would like to see him continue up in that level and really get some of those fights that he's hoping for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, me personally, when I saw that fight announcement for Mateusz Gamrot facing Klein, I was like, whoa, they really don't like him. So thank you guys for that. Eric, we don't have any bets to go over from last weekend, but we do, of course, have this one this weekend. So let's get your 3 bets in 3 minutes in.
We're back at the warehouse, right? UFC 307. We are here. We're going to do some betting picks. And let's get started here with the main event. Erin Blanchfield versus Macy Barber. Erin Blanchfield, she reminds me of like Sean Brady. She's like the Sean Brady of the flyweight division. She's always coming forward. She's always looking to grapple. She's a jiu-jitsu savant. She's always looking for submissions and arm bars especially. She's an armbar queen. And Sean Brady, if anything, he's the front headlock king. So for me, I'm looking at Erin Blanchfield Blanchfield against a very high level, good athlete like Barber, who was once considered a big time prospect in this division. Barber's undoing here as a plus 200 underdog is her takedown defense. She only defends takedowns at a 52% rate. Blanchfield is obviously a very, very good grappler, and she's also really high level and high cardio and high volume when it comes to her striking. So for me, I'm looking to back Blanchfield here. I'm looking to back her in a little bit of an oddball way. Same game parlay, Blanchfield, and the fight just starts round 3. It's minus 160 over on DraftKings. That's my pick for the main event. And then we'll go over to the co-main event, and we got, a not so friendly face for the opponent, but Mateusz Gamrot, once considered like the cream of the crop of the lightweight division, an absolute like grappling phenom. He beat Arman Tarzukian, who was supposed to fight for the title, and I love Mateusz Gamrot. I think that his grappling is just light years ahead of Ludovic Klein. And for me, I think Klein's getting a ton of respect here. He's only a plus 130 underdog. He defends takedowns at a 91% rate, but he hasn't really fought anybody anywhere near Gamrot's level. This is a massive step up in competition. Like Roosevelt Roberts, who we fought last time out. Roosevelt Roberts was on Ultimate Fighter with Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler last time out. I'm not a big Roosevelt Roberts guy, and I don't really see this as a Klein defends takedowns for 15 minutes and then he clips Gamrot, who gets hurt. I look at this as Gamrot, as long as he doesn't fall in love with bad striking technique, I would say Gamrot should just get a bunch of takedowns here, grind him out, and win by decision. So Gamrot by decision plus 102 is the official pick there. And then we're going to go with the long shot here. I've always been a Kurt Holobuck guy, and I know that sounds crazy to hear because he's a prelims guy. He's lost a bunch of fights. But here's my thing with Kurt Holobuck. I actually think that he beat Alexander the Great Hernandez last time out. I'm standing by that. I also had bet on him to do that, but he's 22-9, and I think he's the better striker here. I think he's got a big size advantage. Jordan Levitt's about 5'9", and he's not like a thick 5'9" either. He's more of like a lanky 5'9". Hurlbuck is going to be better striker, got a size advantage, and I just I think that he's being undervalued here based on a loss that maybe the odds makers or people don't remember or haven't watched. Holobuck looked really strong in striking there. He is going to get taken down, but I think that he'll win like a 29-28 decision. He only defends takedowns at like a 39% rate. It's really, really pitiful. But I like his striking enough that I'm willing to take a shot, a plus 500, Kurt Holobuck by decision.
Alrighty, thank you so much for that, Eric. And now on to Scott for his event rating. How are we looking?
We've got a 26 here. I think that's still a pretty solid number for anything coming out of the warehouse, right? It's I think speaks to the strength of the main event. I think it speaks to the strength of kind of some of the other fighters on this card. Gamrot, we noted. There's also a very important 135-pound women's fight between Ketlin Vieira and Macy Chasson. If Chasson wins this fight, she's a very interesting potential title challenger. Let's say if things especially don't work out with Amanda Nunes potentially coming back and fighting the winner of Juliana Pena and Kayla Harrison. Harrison wins that fight and there's no Amanda Nunes on the board and Vieira wins. I don't know that we have the same thing here because Harrison just beat Vieira. We don't really need to see that again, even though it was competitive, but just wasn't super close. So there's some important fights here. I think there's some interest. And one more thing, I have to pick a bone with the graphic designers on this event poster, unfortunately, because what we have right down the middle, we're breaking up Blanchfield into 3 lines. Field. We're breaking up syllables here. What are we doing, guys? Come on.
Yeah,
this
MMA
is stupid.
Twitter
And you're
was going
leading with the
crazy on
word
that.
blah. You're going to try and get people to watch a fight where the first thing they see is blah. What are we doing?
That's why I'm going to think about the card. That's why I don't like the main event. I just think it's blah.
There we go.
And I disagree. I think they're doing a disservice. Promote the product.
Yep.
All right, we got to keep moving because we're running short on time. So that is the event rating. Thank you so much for that, Scott. We all did the homework, right? You guys watched UFC
I did
1?
the homework. Did anyone else do the homework?
Eric, did you do the homework?
Indeed.
Oh, okay, that's good.
I noticed, Jake, your hand is down. Why is your hand down?
Oh, what? No, it's... I blame it on my dad, all right? Because he and I got ice
Always
cream.
blame the parents,
Yeah.
yes. And
I was-
are we blaming your dad because he was mean to you or because he took you for ice cream?
Both. He was mean by he was mean by taking me away from UFC 1 and getting me ice cream. So There's that. But I
Yeah.
would love to hear your guys' thoughts before we wrap up.
Eric, I want to know what you thought of UFC 1. Had you watched it before?
Yeah, I had watched it, but this time I actually took like notes. So a couple
Okay.
notes. The referees were making it up as they go along immediately. Still are, by the way. Referees still making it up as they go along in the UFC. Second one, the corners throw in the towel. This needs to come back. Start throwing in the towel more. Like, I don't understand why it doesn't happen. Like, and these fights are quick. Like, they're like, I forget who it was, but one of the fights lasted like a minute and a half, and they threw in the towel with a minute and a half. That
I
needs
think
to
you
be
might be
more.
thinking of the first fight. The first fight of the
Yeah.
whole of UFC history was like about a minute and a half. It was Taylor Tooley against Gerard Gordeau, right?
The first fight was with the kick with the bleeding, and then the second one they threw in the towel. He was covered up. It was only a minute and a half, but he threw in the towel. Throw in the towel more. Couple other things. Fighters that had like actual UFC potential that I think that if they were born now, they actually could have been like in the UFC. Gerard Gordeau, obviously, he was in the finals against Royce Gracie. Art Jimerson, I actually really liked him. I think he lost in his first fight, but Art Jimerson actually really liked his movement. I thought he looked really good. Obviously, Ken Shamrock too. He got all the screen time that they could possibly give him. Interviews before and after every fight. We also didn't see a lot of Patrick Smith, but I liked his physique. And I would have been interested to see how he looked. But I mean, obviously, Ken Shamrock probably would have been in the UFC if it was up to the standard of what it is now. But those are my thoughts, Scott. What do you got?
The only thing I wanted to put out there is obviously it's a throwback to a different time when the sport could not have envisioned being what it really is today. Now instead of mixing different martial arts against each other, all the martial arts have been mixed together in essentially one homogenous mixed martial arts style in some ways that people interpret in very different ways. And unfortunately, we are 32 years out, 31 and a half years out from that event, that amazing critical mass point for this sport to grow into what it is. Half of the field has since passed away. That is an unfortunate thing to see. But I encourage anybody to go back and watch it. If nothing else, it's a piece of history, and it was fascinating. It was also fun to go back and watch once again.
Absolutely. And speaking of history, Rob, right before we get out of here, what is the homework for this week and our This Week in MMA, if you can, Scott?
Well, I'm going to hope you do it this
Yeah, I
time,
know.
Jake, and
Sorry.
maybe buddy your time a little bit better.
I will.
But we're signing to you guys UFC 104, Lyoto Machida against Mauricio Shogun Rua back in October 2009. This was the first title defense of the Machida era, such as it was. Machida was unbeaten coming in. He had this karate-based style hyped up as practically unbeatable. Shogun, he was a Muay Thai-based arsenal. He had dealt with injuries coming into this fight over the previous years, so he wasn't really quite what we had seen during his just incredible Pride 2005 middleweight Grand Prix run. But it's a very important fight to watch for a lot of reasons. You'll see why, Jake.
And then what is our This Week in MMA? By the way, very excited for that one.
This week in MMA, 5 years ago, we're not going back too far, but this was an impressive date in the sense that it's led to a lot of different things, right? May 30th, 2020, UFC Fight Night, Woodley versus Burns. Why are we talking about this one? It was the first official UFC event to be held at the UFC Apex.
Oh,
This
my.
coming event that we're talking about this weekend is Apex number 114, and that accounts for 15% of all UFC events ever in just about 5 years.
There we go. Coming full circle. What a way to wrap up and put a bow on it. Scott, Eric, thank you guys so much for watching. You at home, make sure you do your homework unlike me, and we will see you guys. We will see you guys next week.